Hi, this is Valerie Escobar, Certified Financial Planner with Mariner Wealth Advisors, and you're listening to Your Life Simplified. I am joined today by Dr. Christina Lynn, Certified Financial Planner here at Mariner as well. Christina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Valerie, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, I am glad to have you here because today our topic is about something that we'll see if our listeners can guess. One of the biggest risks for kind of ruining a financial plan. It's something that could happen to about 50% of older adults. And once you hit the age of 75, the odds shoot up to 70%. And this is long-term care. And it is not only a topic that is very financially concerning and can be difficult if not planned for it ahead of time, but really the emotional piece can be pretty tough. Today, the way that I wanted to address it is really on the side of children of their parents that are needing the financial care. And so usually we can kind of call them a sandwich generation. They usually have older children themselves, but their parents are getting to a point where they no longer can care for themselves. So, when we're talking about emotional, I guess, issues that come up with long-term care, one of the biggest thing is that a lot of parents really just want to stay in their homes. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah. So a part of that, of course, is cost. They don't want to spend the extra money of leaving their home, and that dollar sign of the charges that like an assisted living care facility charges is causes sticker shock. So part of it's the cost and just wanting to avoid that. But probably a bigger issue of just wanting to stay in your own home is your comfort zone. They've been living there for a long time. They're in control of their settings. They're comfortable there. They have memories there. And thinking about moving someplace else is scary. So I definitely say that it's normal for older adults to want to stay in their home and age.
Yeah. And it's really interesting too, because there's sort of this balancing act that you'll have to do that, you don't want to push them out too soon, but then you're also, when they get to a point where maybe they're too fragile that they can't move, and so you have to kind of figure out the two, has been something that I've encountered with some clients. Another thing that I've noticed is just guilt. Have you come across that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, and I'm coming to this conversation with the lens of my interest as a wealth advisor, financial planner. Also, I have an interest in behavioral finance, and this emotional piece, like you said, is so tied up in this conversation. But also, I'm also a daughter of parents that are aging. And so I'm thinking about this conversation for myself. And, when I was reading up on this topic, I was noticing that how normal it is for us as the children to feel guilty about even bringing this conversation up. You kind of feel guilty no matter what approach you take. You can feel guilty about this or that. And so while I don't have a solution for that, I think it just helps to normalize that this is a feeling that a lot of people have when broaching this subject with their parents.
Yeah. And it is tough to go from being the daughter, the child, to all of a sudden you're the parent.
Yeah.
Maybe trying to, I don't know if convince is the word or really what it is. But maybe, that's really where I would love to talk about is how, as the child, do you start to broach that topic with your parents?
Yeah. So I have so many notes I wrote down for this, Valerie, and we can kind of go through whatever ones are of interest to you. But I have quite a few tips that I just thought of through some of my training that I've had, and also some things that I found mostly on sites like Genworth, who is a big long-term care provider. But so one of the tips is to ask for permission. And so when you do this, when you ask for permission to talk about this conversation with your parents, it's a sign of respect that you want them to be in control of this conversation, because like we mentioned with that fear of moving outside of your house, there's just like, you're taking the control away from them in a way of when this topic is brought up. Not just the talking about it, but they associate it with that loss of control. So
Mm-hmm.
asking permission, I think, helps. And would you like me to say an example that I came up with? Because sometimes it's
That Yes, no, an example would be fantastic.
okay. So I have a couple of these and we'll see how they go. Hey, Dad, I want to do my best to make sure that you have everything you need in the future in terms of healthcare covered. Would you be willing to share some of your thoughts on this to me with me? There may come a day where you need more help than what I can provide, and I want to make sure that you always feel like you're in control. So
Mhm.
that's an idea of
That
how to
one's
ask for permission.
Yeah, and I love the idea of you saying, I want you to be in control, right? We're working together so you can be well, and I want you to be the one to making these decisions.
Yeah.
Now that one's great. Do you have a second example you could give us?
Well, I have a lot. My next thought on this is to be prepared to put the conversation on hold
Mm,
because this is such a big topic that when you bring this up to your parents, they just may not be ready for it. So you almost
mhm,
need to be ready for this like primer conversation and then put it on hold and then talk about it more. Um, they also may want to do their own research. So just be prepared for
mm.
that.
Yeah, no, one idea that I sometimes give to my clients is to kind of make us as their financial planner the one to blame, or either saying, my financial planner brought up the idea of long term care, and it made me think of, maybe you had ideas or thoughts,
Yeah.
as an excuse for bringing up the conversation.
Yeah, that's actually brilliant. And I was kind of thinking of that in terms of prompts for the
Mm,
conversation because
yeah,
is such an awkward thing to bring up to your parents. You've never talked to them about anything like this in the past. How in the world do you do this? Not awkwardly. So I love the
right.
idea of having a prompt and blaming you, the wealth advisor, is a perfect excuse. And I love it. I think that is totally a legitimate prompt. I have a couple other ideas for prompts.
Yeah,
Let's see.
perfect.
So one other prompt to bring up this conversation as kind of a segue into the conversation eventually is to bring up their current estate plan. So you may want
Mm,
to ask like where their papers are currently stored. And sometimes what I've done with this in the past myself is I've said, hey, mom and dad, this is where my papers are stored in case anything ever happens to me. So you can find it in my closet above my shoe rack. And that may lead into then them explaining where their current documents could be found. And then that leads into a deeper conversation. Another idea with the estate planning documents is you could bring up the fact that it's recommended or your wealth advisor recommended that they update their powers of attorney every 3 years. So are those
mhm.
updated? Hey, I'm updating mine. Just want to be on the same page. Um, and then lastly, are you familiar with an advanced healthcare directive? That's sort of like I'm not sure if that's a newer thing.
Yeah, no, I think you should definitely explain it though. I think that's a great tool that people should definitely have at their disposal.
Okay, so it's not anything that your attorney needs to fill out or anything. It's just a template that you can get. You can find them online, but it's a more detailed list of how you would like your care to be handled in the event that you need care when you're older or incapacitated or disabled in some way. And for those people who do have more particular, concerns about, their medical treatment and things like that, they can really get down into the nitty gritty of how they'd like things handled. So that could be another prompt into, hey, mom and dad, have you heard of this? I think it might be really of
Mm,
interest to you. It doesn't cost anything. Let's connect on this. And oh, by the way, how would you want something to be handled in case you needed to stay for a stint in a nursing home, for example? Tell me about your thoughts on that.
yeah. No, those are all great ideas. And as you said, that sometimes, or a big piece of it is that a lot of parents will say, well, it's so expensive. I want to make sure I have an inheritance left for you. And I don't want to spend the money on myself, like long-term care on needs. But I mean, it's a real cost, right? So,
Mhm.
let's talk about how much does it cost?
Yeah, well, that's $1 million question. Hopefully not actually $1 million, but okay. So for those, I do think it's helpful to look at the statistics with this because
Hmm.
your wealth advisor, they can't like figure this out with any preciseness because we don't know until after the fact. But
Hmm.
when you can look at Morningstar, they have some really great statistics about the averages and things like that. So they say that the average end of life cost in a patient's last 5 years of life costs around 260,000 ish. And then with dementia, it's more. It costs around
Hmm.
320,000. And those are like 2-year-old statistics. So it helps to just kind of be aware of the average, depending on your health and your history, of course, and your risk tolerance. Like, do you want to plan on the average, or do you want to plan on worst case scenario? Um,
Hmm.
Help to be aware of that, and then also I'd like to bring up the conversation of life expectancy. I was thinking about this. Talking about life expectancy, just the two of us is normal because as
Right.
wealth advisors, that's just like part of our planning process. But to the client, the public, that's a kind of an awkward thing to talk about.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
think just normalizing, hey, this is just a tool that you can fill out online and get a fairly accurate expectation of how long to plan for, and then that can help you plan for, well, when do those costs hit. And so it's just that unknown variable that you're trying to fill in. So you can look at some online tools. I checked out livingto100.com.
Mm.
That's a good free online tool to set some expectations for that.
Perfect. Yeah. And I love the idea too of saying, I want to just hear more about my family history. How old was your mom? What was her, was she super active until the end? Or, do we have history? What's her history like? Because that'll really be a strong indicator, I
Yeah.
think for your own health.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioning that makes me think of another technique, which is just to be curious and to ask
Hmm.
questions and to really listen, talk less. And
Mm.
when you're curious about asking asking those questions, like you mentioned, like, hey, how did your mom handle this? Like, how
Mm.
I remember, this is how your sibling experienced this. Like, did I miss anything because I just wasn't paying attention? Or how would you do it differently? Is there anything that you
Mm.
regret, or what did you learn? Share your wisdom with me because I want to learn. And then
Yeah.
that then can segue again into the long-term care conversation, hopefully less awkwardly.
Right. No, absolutely. And that really goes into another topic, is as far as, how did your family, deal with some of these things? A lot of times people will assume that their caretakers are just their family members.
Hmm.
But most people don't realize what that entails. That
Hmm.
is not just, showing up once a day for an hour to help with meals or something like that. Can you talk a little bit on that, about what the emotional implications perhaps and what the day to day might look like for a caretaker?
Yeah. So this is really an overlooked aspect of long-term care planning. Um, Often it is that spouse or child who's giving the care. And I have some statistics to share, and then we can kind of debrief on that. So
Perfect.
according to AARP, in 2017, over 41 million family caregivers in the US provided an estimated $34 billion hours of care to an adult with limitations. And an economic value of their unpaid contributions was approximately $470 billion. So those are really
Wow.
big numbers, but to break it
Hmm.
down to a more personal level, the if you were to look at just the average caregiver, the time and money that they spend, they have an equivalent value of spending about or putting in about $30,000 a year. Like that's what their caregiving roughly equates to, because it's like a big part-time job in a way.
Right.
Most caregivers are between the ages of 50 and 64, and they provide care for an average of 4 years. And then I want to end with this statistic, an estimate, I should say. And one expert estimated the cost of caregivers' loss in wages, benefits, out-of-pocket expenses to be between 150 and 750,000, with an average of 300,000.
That's wild. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
big piece of what I try to encourage clients to say, the plan for your parents is part of your plan too. Because if you're going to retire early, if you're going to stop working, what are we going to do? What are you going to do around that? And then also
Mm-hmm.
that segues into your parents, because a lot of clients I hear that the parent is so concerned about leaving something for their children. Well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you want to help leave something to me now by, let's look at what other kind of caregiver resources there are out there. And maybe let's talk a little bit about that, the forms of, I guess, caretakers that are available out there.
I look at this in like two different ways. Like the physical caregiving, it may escalate to nursing home, assisted living facility, independent living apartments,
Hmm.
adult daycare, in-home care. And that was a list of most expensive to least expensive. So that's kind of one category we could chat about. But another category is just like the patient advocate, or who is
Hmm.
going with your parents to their doctor appointments and kind of helping them navigate the medical system, because still a form of caregiving. And so
Hmm.
that's again often done by a spouse or a child. They do also have like professionals who can fulfill that role as well. They call them patient advocates. It's usually like a nurse or somebody in the medical profession, but they can also help go to doctor appointments, figure out insurance, understand the jargon being talked about, making sure that the instructions are understood, that sort of thing. So those are the big
Yeah.
topics.
Yeah. And that's, I think, another big piece is that, sometimes we think of it as just giving medication, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe helping to transferring from the, to the shower or to the toilet or something like that. But there's just it really builds up. And I think for the sake of helping maintain a good relationship between the caregiver and the person needs to be cared, incorporating some additional help and looking at those costs objectively and saying, this is actually for all of our benefit. It's not that you are, I don't know, weak, that you're uncaring, that you spend a lot of money or anything like that, that really is for everybody's benefit.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And so I think we're about to close up here. Do you have any, I guess, final thoughts, anything else you want to share with our audience, of just thoughts and concerns that they should have in top of mind for them?
Yeah, I think, the message I always want to drive home is to be curious, let them talk, just get them talking and
Hmm.
make them feel validated about being heard. So when they finally get the courage to say really how they feel, you can try just repeating it back to them without any sort of slant on the message to try to, get your agenda across, but really just letting them know that like, hey, I get what you're saying. Like privacy is most important to you, or not being a burden on someone is the most important to you. Again, that may not jive with what your agenda is or what you want them to do, but just making sure that they feel heard is still going to help them process their feelings, and they may actually eventually be more willing to be open to your proposal. So being curious, listening, being patient is really important. And I did provide a list of questions. I think just kind of being prepared with different things to ask that maybe you're not thinking about could be helpful. So, you
That'd
have
be
those,
great
you
if you
can
could give
provide
us.
that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. That would be great. Let's see. I guess, can you give us a couple of examples before we close out?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. Um, One of my favorites is anything specific that you'd like to avoid. Um,
Mm,
so kind of asking it in the negative. What's your primary concern about the future? Is it finance, health? Is it your pets? Is it the loss of
mm,
independence? Again, just getting them talking. What ways do you feel prepared or unprepared for the future? Let's see. What are your plans to pay for these expenses?
perfect.
Let's see. Yeah, so those are just a couple. I'll give you the rest.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Well, Dr. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us. I think this was extremely helpful. Like so many things that are sensitive, it's not going to be a one and done type of deal. So I think we both are on the same page and encouraging everyone out there to really, start the conversation and just, plan on revisiting and revisiting. And as always, talk to your financial planner if you need a bad guy or an objective person to be involved as well. You've been listening to Your Life Simplified. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening, and we will catch you next time. Thank you.
Mariner Wealth Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC-registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Kansas. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which it is notice filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money. The views expressed in this podcast is for educational purposes only and do not take into account any individual personal, financial, legal, or tax considerations. As such, the information contained herein is not intended to be personal, legal, investment, or tax advice. Nothing herein should be relied upon as such, and there is no guarantee that any claims made will come to pass. The opinions are based on information and sources of information deemed to be reliable, but Mariner Wealth Advisors does not warrant the accuracy of the information. The guest today is not affiliated with Mariner Wealth Advisors, and their opinions expressed are their own. Certified Financial Planner, trademark, CFP, registered trademark, and federally registered CFP with flame design marks, collectively the CFP registered marks, are professional certification marks granted in the United States by Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards, Inc., also CFP Board. The CFP, registered trademark, certification is a voluntary certification. No federal or state law or regulation requires financial planners to hold the CFP certification.